You're all in trouble. Okay, we get started a little bit early, well, a minute early. I'm not sure how long this session is going to be. So my name is Barry Hughes. I tweeted at DevInTheCloud. And my blog is devonthecloud@wordpress.com. And the reason I raised that is because I have all the slide deck here available in my blog already. So if you want to go onto the blog, you can get it. The deck is full of resources and links. Don't bother taking photographs, download this deck, you can have it, okay? This session is down as a workshop, and it is a workshop. It's going to be introducing you to a workshop. Because the workshop I'm going to introduce you takes about 3 hours to do. We're not doing that today, obviously. We're going to do a small bit of it, but it's the culmination of about 6 months' work. And I'll talk a bit more about it as I go through. But I'll get some housekeeping out of the way first. The company I work for, we're a platinum partner, Blue Wave Group, based in the UK and Ireland. Tell from my accent, we're somewhat in Ireland. We cover many of the clouds. In fact, we have instructors, Salesforce instructors for all of these clouds, as well as implementation people. We have about 45 staff now. Last year we had 30, so we're a platinum partner. And if we are recruiting, let me know if anyone's interested to chat. And quickly about me, I have a number of certifications with Salesforce. I tweeted at DevInTheCloud. There's the blog address if anyone wants to get there now. I'm also a developer. I run the developer group in Dublin. We're going 6.5 years. If you're not a member developer group, join one. They're free. There's probably one around you somewhere. If anyone's in Dublin next Tuesday night, we're meeting up. Let me know. And I'm also a Pluralsight author, and this is sort of where this story begins. So this session, for anyone who wants to know what the session is about, this is primarily focused for developers, especially Lightning component developers. Maybe anyone here made Lightning Aura components before? Lots of people. Anyone made Lightning Web components before? A few. Who's put one into test for a client yet? I'm looking at Jack up there. Anyone else put one for test yet? Okay. So I created a course about 2 years ago for really focused for front-end developers, for Lightning and Apex developers, and also for project managers and analysts, so that we could start developing our features and our functionality in Salesforce in a more iterative fashion. The idea was to be able to prototype our solution, make sure the client is buy-in, then start bringing that into Salesforce piece by piece. I made the course based on a framework that Salesforce, this is actually Salesforce's framework. It's called the Lightning Design System Starter Kit. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it before. It's a GitHub repository that Salesforce UX team made, runs on NPM and a language called Nunjux. But you can make really full-fledged looking apps that look like they're in Salesforce with just HTML and JavaScript. You actually don't even source them on Salesforce itself. I'll show you an example of it in a second. So that course was looking at that design system starter kit, making a pretty big page. It uses JSON and JavaScript in the background, all built into the little package. We made it make a screen that looks pretty realistic for the user. The idea was then that we could take that design, which is HTML and JavaScript, and port it as a kind of a big component into Salesforce, an Aura component, fixing it up a few bits and pieces, and making it work maybe in a utility bar or a record homepage, or people could see it working, but it's still talking to JSON. There's no interaction, there's very little Lightning components going on. The idea was at this stage, people can say stop, move it around, change some HTML. Much easier to do that than it is to change lots of base components. Once you have agreement on what you're going to make, that's when you can start really estimating how long it's going to take, and you can make the solution that they've pretty much UAT'd already because they know what they're going to get. That's the idea behind the talk. And I talked about it in a number of places, including London's Call in 2017. That's a full video of me actually going through this whole process if you want to see it. It's still stand the test of time. The kit is still there. Aura components are still there. And I did an internal webinar where I went more in detail in the actual JSON of the toolkit. I don't have time to go in for today because I have to move on, talk about where this talk went to. Just a brief shout out to Matilda and Jorg from Financial Force. They did a very good session at Dreamforce. You can watch it, 30-minute session, where they talk a bit about what I talked about, and they also included a Voni Creator, which is a product you can buy to make prototypes within Salesforce. Just a brief word of what this app is that I make so I can move on and show where we went. It's a questionnaire app, something I made up myself. Now, I know there's a new questionnaire functionality in Salesforce. This is just pretty much for demo purposes. The idea of it was that, and it actually came from a requirement we had in Blue Wave a number of years ago, where we wanted to make a questionnaire object available to users. The problem was, though, that their questions were more than 40 characters long, and the maximum label can be in a field in Salesforce is 40 characters. So what we did was we made a record for each question, each questionnaire, and each question. And people could log on and answer a questionnaire and answer individual questions by posting up answer records. So the idea was that you have a questionnaire record and sub-records that are each question, and then users would log in, see a questionnaire, hit save on the questionnaire, or make I'm answering this questionnaire with what I call the return record, and then each question has an answer. I can answer 4 out of the 10 questions if I want to. That's the idea behind it. So I'm going to be referring to this data model a little bit today. The design of it was what I nicknamed at the time Instant Experience. It was a ridiculous name, but Don Robbins, who wrote me into all this, wanted a name for it. The idea was that when you go into your questionnaire tab, you see your list of questionnaires. On the far side, when you open up a questionnaire, you see the list of questions for that questionnaire, and there's no save button. Tap your answer and it gets saved immediately. Mobile friendly, that kind of thing, what most of us have done before. So when we created this for the old Aura course, I created what's called a composite Aura component. I took the design into a big component, made it work with the JSON, and then from that on, the course is about 2.5 hours long. It takes that and actually makes a final solution with saving records, Lightning Data Service, the works. And there's a link to the original course in Pluralsight, which was great until December last year, when Salesforce at the World Tour in New York announced something new, Lightning Web Components. Where was my course now? Wonderful. Of course, Don Robbins had the same idea. Where is Don? He's there somewhere. I'm not going to throw some at you today, but I probably will sometime. Don rang me around about Christmas time. Happy Christmas, Don. Are you interested in doing your course again for Lightning Web Components? And like an idiot, I went, oh yeah. So 6 months later, today, it got published on Pluralsight. And it's going to be a free course. It's not free yet, but it's going to be free. It's still getting bedded in today, I think. So you'll all get this for free. Okay? And the idea was that for me, and I wasn't part of the initial pilot of Lightning Web Components. I learned about it. Everyone else did it December. Always I like to learn this. What's prototyping like with this? How do I work with it? And like most of you who have taken it up, you have the same questions. So my idea was, let's take the original app and let's recreate our Lightning Web Components with the same prototyping type of idea how it works and see how I get on. Where was my issues? So the first thing I had to do was I had to make the original course, because the original course had a GitHub repo with code in it. It also has a wiki, step-by-step instructions how to make the original code, but the original course wasn't DX enabled. So I made it DX enabled. I'll show you the code for that in a second. So within a second, you can have the original application up and running, and you can start adding on from my step-by-step wiki of the new course to make the new application, learning things along the way. That's the idea behind it. And in the course, Don and I recorded in Paddy's weekend in Ireland. We stayed sober. I don't know how that happened, but anyway. We recorded it, so you can see me actually go through this step by step. So the idea behind it, the end of the idea, is that we're going to have two applications, the Aura one in one tab and the Lightning Web Components one in the other tab, and you can see the difference between the two. What did I find initially? Problems. The biggest problem I had was when I created my design system starter kit, I still had my design. And just to let you know what that kind of looks like. Come on. Okay. If I pop over here to Chrome. So when I created my design system starter kit, I created this. This is pure HTML and JavaScript. As you can see, it's an Heroku URL. This is not within Salesforce. This is what the kit gives you. I basically made the HTML inside of it. Okay? And inside of HTML, I used a lot of Lightning Design System styling. And I have a very rudimentary way to open up one page from the other. Doesn't work. But they could see records. And these records are filled up with JSON. So I could actually show them realistically what they're looking at. So you can leave this to an end user and they can say, oh yeah, I have an idea what this looks like now. That's fine. How can I move on? To do that, I have to port across code into a Lightning component. And the problem was, close this. The problem was errors. I got a lot of them. Mainly because when I ported the HTML into an Aura component, Aura was a lot easier with HTML. Lightning Web Components are not. It really gives out a lot about markup. Every tag has to have a hyphen. Every tag has to have an end tag. A lot of input fields going on in prototypes. They all fail, okay? So I couldn't figure out all these errors. I kept pushing to a scratch org, bad error message, usually something nonsensical and not a clue where to look for it. So I didn't want to keep at and at trying to get this working, so I had to come up with something else. And this is where really the crux of our course came. I turned to playgrounds. Who here has heard of playgrounds? Who has never heard of them? Okay. So playgrounds are a new feature released on the developer portal that Salesforce themselves have created, where we can make code, in this case Lightning Web Component code, and see it iteratively develop in front of us. And I was able to use this to port across my code from my design, figure out the errors far faster, and get a lot of things working, again, without even being in Salesforce at all. So when I moved my components at the end of that process to Salesforce, they were almost working. I just didn't talk to data, but the code itself was working. So let's show you how to get to the repo, and I'll explain some of the resources and bring you through some of the playground code then, how it works. So if you guys want to take a quick snap of that one, you can get to the GitHub repo there. So it's, I'll leave that for a second. And the first thing we'll do is we'll go and make a new playground. And this is the piece that if you have a laptop and you try things out, you can try things with me. Okay. So let's talk about playgrounds. All right. So how do I get to a playground? This is developer.salesforce.com. Everyone, I suppose, has seen this. Under resources, there's a new area called the Lightning Component Library. This is a new portal that was released around about December. It was actually released at Dreamforce last year, but it's got a lot of iterations since. It's where you can find your developer guides now for Lightning Web Components. You can also find a lot of your definitions for all of your base components here. But it's got an option at the end called Playground. And this is now where we can start iterating over some rudimentary Lightning Web Components to make them work. Okay? So how does this work? Well, on the left-hand side, this left-hand panel over here, we can define a few things about our project. So I'm just going to call a new app name here. This is not necessary. Should it can be done. And I can just prototyping. Now, you'll see on the main panel we've got some code, and on the right-hand side we have a preview of what that code is doing. We can make changes to this pretty quickly. So one way to make a change, if I type the word Barry in here and hit run, it will change the code. You can see the word Barry appeared here. It's an iterative design. You keep designing and designing if you want to. We can also do what's called a live compilation. So I can change, for example, Barry here, and you can see it typed straight away. So you can iterate over your code to see what's happening. Okay? It gives you some example code to start with, but we're going to make something brand new. Okay? So we make something brand new. We're going to make a brand new component. We're making a Lightning Web Component structure here. And what we do is, this works on basis of folders and files. Lightning Web Components, you have to make your own folder and files below it. It usually contains a HTML, a JS file, CSS file maybe, an XML file. So we can create a directory in our playground. I'm going to call it You're Dreaming. And within that folder, you see there's lots more actions in the folder. One of them here is to make a file. I'm going to call it you'redreamin.html. And I'm also going to make a JavaScript file. I have to edit this because the spelling and the capitalization are important in Lightning Web Components. So here is my JS file. and my HTML file. So when I create these, I can add code to these. And to save time, I've built one earlier with these in it. So here is a file, and I've simply added some very basic HTML, not much to it, some H1 and H3. And the JavaScript file has got actually nothing in it, pretty much. So I can make this component, I can add it to my app. The main starting point for the playground is app, so the app Lightning Web Component. In my Lightning HTML, my app HTML, I can start adding references to my components. So I'm going to add my new component, which is called You're Dreamin', to my component and see it on the top. So let's take off this. And you can see the component appears on the right-hand side. So you can see things happening pretty quickly. Let's make an error. I'm going to pop down to my HTML file, and instead of ending it with a div, I'm going to end it with a span. And you can see straight away the error tells us what's going on. This is brand new as of last week. Previously, it just gave you a nonsensical error and you had to figure out what it was. They've actually improved the playgrounds in the last week to include better error handling. So it's fantastic. Imagine pushing this to a scratch org and figuring out what's wrong. I would tell you, okay? So to iterate over your designs with the playground saved me. Because I could iterate fast, get my solution working. Fantastic. A couple of other things to note is that if I finish with my file and I'm happy with the file, let's fix the file. And I want to save it, I press on save. You'll see the URL up here. When you make a new one, it just has the word playground in front of it. But when you make a save, it saves the URL. That means your playground is saved somewhere within the Salesforce portal. Now there's no way to retrieve it. You can't go and find your playground, so you have to save that URL right now. But you can keep going back to it. The other thing that you can do as well is download. So I can download the components I've worked on locally, and I can then move them to a Salesforce org. So I'm iterating here from a design and a system kit into my playgrounds to get a Lightning Web Component working, and I can work away. Okay? Let's go a bit further. Because if that's all playgrounds did, I would have been somewhat excited. But there is more. This playground here is a bit like the playground I would have created for the design I made. As you can see on the right-hand side, it has my questionnaires. And if I click open, you'll see a questionnaire actually opens. And I can close it back. Pretty straightforward. What's really nice, though, is that in this rudimentary prototype, I can get events working. Because we don't have to write Aura events anymore. Lightning Web Components use the custom event property in browsers now. So we don't have to worry about making a Lightning event. So in my code here, if I open up my, let's pick one here, card.js, you'll see in my card, which is what the card is what's displaying a questionnaire in my list. I'm actually calling custom event, which if you learn your Lightning Components, is what we use in regular Salesforce Lightning Web Components now anyway. So events work here. So I almost have a fully functional navigational component working before I even port it into Salesforce. What I found really good about that is that the amount of times I have errors in Lightning Aura events is unreal. It's either a component event with the wrong name or an application event that doesn't fire. I can test it all here before I go. I was quite excited about this. So, let's playgrounds. Start using them. They're pretty good. Pretty good. So showing you playgrounds. Before I move on to the rest of my demos, there's quite a bit to go through here. I want to talk about playgrounds in comparison with the Design System Starter Kit. A couple of things to note about playgrounds. In Design System Starter Kit, they both allow for code progression. What do I mean by that? Previously, I don't know if anyone else has done this, I used balsamic mockups before that or some other tool to show an interface. It looked very cartoon-like. As you saw, the Design System Starter Kit screen looked very real. The playground looked quite real. Because we're progressing the code HTML and JavaScript, we can move those files from raw HTML and JavaScript to Lightning Web Components in the playground into Salesforce working with base components. So it progresses. You're never having to take a design, bin it, and actually start coding. You're actually coding from the start, which is kind of nice. Design System Starter Kit does not support LWC. You don't have any of those imports you can get, like at track or at API, but they all work in the playground. The Design System Starter Kit Heroku prototype, because I use Heroku and I added username and password, it is secure. So I can give a URL to a client and they can see lots of designs and decide without me being there. Playground, as you saw, is just a URL. There's no security behind it. So I would be careful about putting maybe sensitive information in one. Right now, there is no way to secure it. I hope it's coming on the line. It's one way to be fair, square of. I would consider a playground not to be persistent because I don't know when Salesforce cleans them up. We don't have control over it. I would download and store it in the source control. Because there's a kit's code is my own, I've stored it somewhere, it's mine, so no one's going to get rid of it. For Design System Starter Kit, you need web developer skills. Not necessarily Lightning Web Component developer skills, web developer skills. And big companies are taking web developers to make designs and handing them over to Lightning developers to make the rest. But for playgrounds, you need to be a developer. We do get some immediate previews and feedback in the kit because we're using NPM, but you can see in playgrounds it was very iterative. You could see it updating in front of you. For me, the biggest difference between the two is what their intention is. The intention of a design in the starter kit, as you saw on the Heroku page, was to let the end user see what they're going to get on a screen in Salesforce. The playground is really for developers. I'm making a part of the screen. I'm making some functionality. And the team who's building it can talk, but that's not really for end users. End users need to see the whole page because they don't understand a playground. Okay. So, to get up and running with the actual course, browser here, we have a GitHub repo. That's the link I would have shown you on the screen. This repo is public. It's free. So all the code is here. I have a version of the code at its initial state. This would be at the end of the first course I made on Aura components. I have a version of the code at the end of when I brought it in from the playground. And I have a final completed solution. So you guys can pump that into a DX, a simple DX into force.app, spin it up, and off it goes. But if anyone here is not fully DX oriented, I have added a package JSON file in here. If anyone is interested in Node, and there is a command that you can use to create everything in one go. And in this GitHub repo, if we look at the wiki, I have full step-by-step instructions on the first one, which is step 2. Brings you through this. I actually run a simple enough command. That's it there. Where I define a dev hub and a new scratch org name, and just run a build command. And it'll push up the source, up the permission sets, put in some data for questionnaires, get you up and running, and you can start the workshop from there. Okay? So if you want to take this on tomorrow or later on, grab this wiki, run with the base code, and get started. The playground part is in section 2. The first part is actually the Design System Starter Kit. It brings you through exactly how to get up and running if you haven't done it before. I have a previous GitHub repo as well. So it gives you an idea of what the GitHub address for that is. Section 2 is what I just showed you, making the playgrounds. Gives you full instructions of what's in the playground, how to work with the playground. Once I've done that, the next step is to move the components into a Salesforce org. There's 2 ways to do it. The easiest way is to download the components using the button on the playground and simply port them in with Ant. However, there is one thing to note, that in Lightning Web Components, there needs to be an XML file. There is no XML file here. Okay? So my advice is to create a blank Lightning Web Component in Salesforce and then push this files across or just port over the code, whichever you want to do it. Yeah, we're doing well. Okay, about halfway through. One second here to get my bearings. Okay. In the playground I showed you where the solution was pretty much done. I just want to show you, quick briefly, how I ported the code from the starter kit into the Lightning Web Component. I'm going to show it to you, not there. Sorry. Yeah. So this here is, I don't know if you can make that any bigger. Yeah. So this here is the code as I would have brought it across. It uses nunjucks, which is this way of doing an iterator, and I've replaced it with a template. But you can see a lot of the JSON I have here is still here. This is very simple. This JSON is just a JSON object that I can grab from the JS file. There's not much there to it. And then I'm able to loop through. This is where I had my errors. It took me a while to figure them all out. The input field gives me huge problems. I got to remove it. So I simply brought in a base component. They work well in playgrounds. Base components work, even though it doesn't save anything. And I was able to bring and just replace everything. Once I had this code in, my Lightning component was working in playgrounds. Okay, so let's talk about, once I've moved it to Salesforce, what did I find in terms of creating the final functionality? So the final functionality, if I bring up the slide and I'll show you the data model. So the final functionality requires a few things. Has that been there all the time? Okay. Okay. So my final functionality is I have to make components so the user can see a list of questionnaires, to have some kind of component for each questionnaire in that list. Then I have to have a component that they can open up the questionnaires to see an individual set of questions for a questionnaire, be able to save them with an answer JS file, and an answer component. Let's show it to you in action. And I have some problems. My laptop is going nuts. Okay. You have to close PowerPoint. Microsoft. Okay. So the idea of it is that when I show this list here, this overall component is the list of questionnaires. Then I have what I call a card, which is an individual questionnaire. When I click on open, this is individual records. These are the options, and this answer here, this question is a question record I have to answer. Okay? Once I answer it, I also have to have a return on top. So Barry is answering this questionnaire with these answers. But one of the key aspects of this was learning the different nuances of what Lightning component development is like compared to Aura component development. And as I developed this further, I found a lot of differences. And those differences is what I really covered in the last part of the course. So if you're new to Lightning component development and you've done Aura before, there's a lot of differences. One is how we actually link to components. We use kebab case to talk to a component and camel case to access Apex work. We have to know what API track and at wire are. API is where you have a public property in a component you can feed in from a parent. At track means a bit like in Angular where a variable changes on screen immediately, tracks it on the screen. And at wire is what we use to either call Apex or call data service. You have to be able to display, how we display Lightning Web Components in the app builder and move it onto a tab. Then how we actually call Apex. So I'm going to get my questions because they're records. Called an Apex, how do I do that? Lightning Data Service, how does that work? And CRUD operations. And a key difference between Aura components and Lightning Web Components is data binding. In Aura components, your attributes are two-way data binding. What that means is that if I have an Aura attribute on a parent component and I'm passing it into a child as an attribute into a child, if I update the attribute value in the child, it immediately updates the parent. Everything gets updated. It's two-way data binding. And same for the parent down to the child. In Lightning Web Components, it is strictly one way. If you've got that same attribute or property in the child coming from the parent, you're not allowed to change it. You must tell the parent to change it and receive it back. Okay? It's a lot more efficient use of JavaScript. And it was a key issue for me to get this solution working. We're going to see two design patterns in a second that I had to use to get over certain things where one-way data binding was interesting. But the next important thing to learn are lifecycle hooks. These are things that are not in Aura components, at least not readily available, but they are crucial to learn when you're doing Lightning Web Components. These are lifecycle hooks that, again, are not part of Salesforce. They're part of Web Component spec from W3C. And we have different functions we can call reacting to certain events on our Lightning Web Component. For example, our connected callback runs when the component renders. Our rendered callback calls when something changes on screen. Okay? And we're going to use these to solve two issues that I had. Issue number one. My instant design experience meant that I wanted to be able to open up a questionnaire and simply tap on an answer to save it. But answer, in my data model, had a master detail relationship lookup to something called a return. Barry Hughes is answering a questionnaire. I make a return for the questionnaire, and my answers are child records for that questionnaire. When I tap the answer, I haven't told it to make the return, so it's going to fail, right? This was issue number one. Let's show that to you in action and show you how I resolved it. Okay, so here is my org, and I'm in my list of questionnaires. Nothing has been answered. I'll open up the first one, and I want to answer my questionnaire. I tap an answer, and I get an error. I'm trying to save the answer, but I don't have an ID of a parent return. That's the problem, okay? This individual gray box is in a component, but the actual general survey and all the list of questions are in my parent return component. I got to tell the return to save itself, and then tell me is the answer, so I can save myself. How do I do that in Lightning Web Components? So let's show you the code in action. And this is where I go to VS Code. I hope you guys can see it. I'll just assume that's a huge yes, right? Okay, so let's go to my questionnaire answer, which is the bottom, the individuals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 I was selecting. And in my web code, pretty simple, I have my radio group. This is my options that I can select 1 to 5. And I have an onChange event here that's calling a function in JavaScript. Process questionnaire answer record. It's a pretty simple function. What it's doing is it's checking to see, have you saved this answer already? If you have. If you haven't, great, create it. And if not, update it. There is no real upsert in Lightning Web Components stuff yet. When I create a record in Lightning Web Components, the main key is to create something called a record input. This record input object contains the API name, what you're trying to save, and also a list of fields. And we can make Lightning Web Components aware of the schema because in this component, I've imported in lots of things from the schema and using these defined variables in my fields. So if someone tries to delete a field, this Lightning Web Component will stop them. That didn't happen in Aura, which is kind of handy. So if you're wondering what all the code is in the creation, that's what it is. Then I simply do a create record. That's a function within Lightning Web Components, and it'll save the record. So that should have worked, but the problem was the ID of the parent questionnaire wasn't there. In other words, this value here was blank. I got to fill it in. So how I'm going to fix it is I'm not going to call the first function, I'm going to call a second one. And this is where I hope the web gods are with me. Okay, what did I do there? I'm going to call a different function called handle field value change. It's here. And what this is doing, it's getting something, for example, it's getting what I changed, whether it's a comment or I updated the radio button, but it's actually going to check to see, is my parent ID there? If it isn't there, I'm going to do something. If it is there, I'm simply going to call the function I called in the first place. First thing to note is I'm cryptically setting a trackable variable to false. I'll come back to this at the end. There's a reason for that. But if I don't have a return, I need to tell the parent to save itself. So I do my event prevent default, and then I'm setting my mysterious Boolean to true. Again, I'll come back to it. And I'm calling my new custom event. It's called create return. I'm passing it an ID, but actually I didn't have to pass this ID, but in this example, I'm showing that you can. This create return, what's listing for it? Well, this answer component has got a parent component. Here it is, questionnaire answer. And it has an onCreate return attribute. Remember, my event was called create return. So on the parent, onCreate return is listing for that. And when I fire that event, it'll run some functionality. Create questionnaire return. My create questionnaire return is a bit like you saw a minute ago. I'm just doing a creation of a record. Not much to it. But it's crucial to note I'm updating something. I'm updating two properties. Questionnaire return ID, question is the main one I'm changing, because this is being passed back down to the child answer as return ID. And I'm going to get that, and that return ID is eventually going to be used. Where's the API here? Yeah, there's return ID there. That's what I passed through. And I'll be using that later on to actually save my answer. However, there is a problem, if you don't think about it correctly, is that when I make that save, what's actually happening on the application, if I go back to my list, is that all all of the answers in my questionnaire are getting that update. They're all getting the new ID. Problem is, I need this one to save itself. I don't want the rest of them to save themselves, just the one I'm actually editing. So how I got around that was that mysterious Boolean. I've set it through in the component I want to save. It's false in all the rest of them. So when I go and pick that up, I save it. And where it's being saved is in my re-rendered callback function, one of the lifecycle hooks we talked about a minute ago. And when it runs, it's picking up that I have a new return ID, great. It's going to set that value, my trackable property. Now it's checking to see, is that magical Boolean of yours, is it true? Yes, you're the one that wants to save yourself. And I go ahead and save the answer. Okay? One little trick. The code by itself I showed you won't work, because the rendered callback only fires when something that's rendered in the markup changes. I don't display the return ID anywhere. It's an ID. Why would I display it? So the only way I had to get around it was to actually display it on the top in a hidden div. Quirky, and I'm open to correction. But that's the only way I can get it to work. That return ID is basically getting re-rendered, and that's what caused the re-rendered callback. Okay? Have I lost everybody? I'll take that as a resounding yes too. Okay, so let's see if my code actually works. I'll just refresh my cache. And I assume my push worked. Open up my questionnaire. And what I should see here is two green boxes. One saying the return saved, and the second one saying the answer saved. I tap on that, and I get my two green answers. That means they've both saved. Okay? Design pattern 1. And I go through this quite in detail in the course. Second problem, design pattern 2. When I save that, what I really want is I want not just the answer and questionnaire to be saved for the user, Barry Hughes, but when Barry Hughes goes to the list of questionnaires from the front, I'd like it to show I've answered it. Remember, one-way data binding. The list on the parent does not know that the actual questionnaire return was saved by me. It doesn't know I've started, how many questions I've done. I have to tell it to update as well. But there's 3 places I got to use to update it. One is wherever I make a questionnaire return. One is when I make an answer, and I also have an option down here to mark it complete, that I've said, okay, I'm finished. I'm answering 4 to 5, I'm not answering the 5th one, mark me complete. Okay? So how do I do that? Again, I use events, but this is an example of a bubbling event. Because when you save an answer, I want the answer to update 2 levels above. Okay? So how does that work with Lightning Web Components? So let's go to my code again. Whoa. Okay, I'm not switching that again. All right. Okay, so if I go to my code that I had a minute ago, where I was saving my questionnaire return, I'm also then calling another event called update questionnaire list. This is designed to bubble up. Now in this case, I'm bubbling up to the parent, so I don't have to use bubbling here, but I'll have to use it from the child. I'm also giving it some detail and operation. It is good etiquette in web component development that when you pass an attribute up from an event, you put it inside a object called detail, this general etiquette in W3C. And you can have an object in here. This operation is important, new return. I'm doing the same thing in answer. When I create an answer, it should be down here, I'm calling the same event, update questionnaire list, but I'm saying new answer here, not new return. And again, it's bubbling up, so it's bubbling from that all the way up to the top of the scope. I'm doing the same thing for complete. But let's show you the code in action, because right now it's not working. I have to show you how it works on the original list. So in my list, how do I listen to this? Because I'd normally put an event in my declaration of the tag, but it's bubbling up from a subchild, so that's not going to work. So what you have to do is you've got to kind of wrap it around in something. It can be a template. In this case, I use the div. This is waiting for that bubbling up event. I'm going to call something. So that's called from anywhere below. I'm calling a function, handle questionnaire, update questionnaire list, whatever it's called. I'm also calling it on the close button. So if I go to my list, JavaScript, I've got some code here that when I close the questionnaire, I want the list to refresh. How does it refresh? Well, first things first, it won't refresh. The reason it won't is because it's an Apex class, and the Apex class has a method, but it has cachable equals to true on it. So hopefully you guys know what the rule with this is that if you call it within 90 seconds, it won't refresh. And between 90 and 15 minutes, it kind of will, and after that, it'll get a whole new set. So, but we can't trust it, because I might tap immediately and see the list. I want to refresh this. Just as a word of warning, if you haven't got cacheable true on a JPEX method, you cannot use it in a Lightning Web Component. It must be cacheable equal true. Okay. So how do I get that method in? Question one, because there's no controller tag. Well, you bring it in using an import on the top of your JavaScript. And this is brilliant. Who here is fed up of our components only having one controller and having branches of code out from it and using service components? My God, service components. They're brilliant. People have talked great talks about it, but my God. Now I can get individual methods where I want them from 20 different classes if I want. It's fantastic. I'm calling get questionnaires. Also, if someone changes this or removes the method, it'll stop them, because I've said I want it. Great. I'm also grabbing something else from a Salesforce library called Refresh Apex. Getting there. Refresh Apex is one of many libraries you can grab. Create record, update record, there's a lot of them. That's your main learning curve with Lightning Web Components, figure out what these things are. This library allows us to refresh the Apex whenever we want. So if I go down to my code that I had commented out, I have uncommented it now. This is waiting, if you recall, from my operation name, new answer, new return, and it's calling a line, refresh Apex, this.questionnaires. That's because at the start, we got our initial list using an wire of the same thing. Refresh it, just refresh it. And when you've refreshed it, call it again. Call that method again. That's the method on the class. And return back the new set of results. Now it will always refresh from anywhere below. Twice. Always. I'm forcing it to refresh all the time. Yep. So let's push, and hopefully the last demo gods were with me. Yeah, okay, let's see if it works now. Don't make a liar out of me. Don't make a liar out of me. This has gone swimmingly. Okay, so let's open up a brand new one. Should get my 2 green boxes. 1, 2. Press close, and it's updated. So you can see 2 design patterns here to use custom events, and especially use lifecycle hooks, which are brand new things to us in Lightning Component development, to react to things that we need to react to. So in my wiki, I take you through all of this. There is a final demo I had if I had time. I don't have time, which is a kind of standalone thing. If I want to try quickly, there's a step in it called 28, where you actually do a full CRUD operation with a simple example without being inside the big app. Shows you how CRUD operations work, which is done pretty well in the design gallery. Not 100%, but it's pretty well. So that was my slide deck until Monday. And I got an update. A few updates. I was using Visual Studio Code there. It's probably the only way to make Lightning Web Components now. You can't make them in a developer console. But at Trail DX, they made huge announcements, without showing anything, that the new IDE for the web is coming. Let's see how that works.
Look at the
Don't know. I'll see when I see it. But as I showed you a minute ago, we now have a lot better error handling. So Chris Gray, and the guy, follow Chris Gray if you can. He's the guy who brought you the developer debugger on the bottom of Chrome. He's involved now in the playground and this whole portal. They've actually announced some better error handling, and it is fantastic. I can't believe I last Monday, life my world changed, getting better error messages. And also you can run things a little bit quicker with some quick commands. But it looks like they're making it better. Great. I'd love to be able to store it in an org. I'd love to be able to connect it to an org. Can't do that yet. Hopefully in the future. And Nate Totten was then talking. There is a very good session coming up at the end of this month. Please get on if you're a developer, where he's going to show you the new way to develop Lightning Web Components with local development. That might put my whole course in the bin. I don't know. Still, it's nice to see that local development is coming. So you'll be able to do a lot of iterative design there, like I did with the playground. There's the components on your own browser, on your own computer machine. Okay, so keep in touch with that. My last slide is, oh, come on. Slide is all the links to everything that you just saw, GitHub Wiki, everything. Again, this slide deck is on my blog, so you don't have to worry about it. I'll leave that slide up. Most of the links you need are there. Yes, it is going to be free, that course. You don't have to be a member of Pluralsight to get to it. There is another course on Pluralsight that a guy called Chuck Liddell did. Has anyone seen that course? I basically hop on top of it. So his is a very technical explanation of Lightning Web Components. Mine is a very practical example once you've seen his course, okay? So Chuck Liddell, his course on Lightning Web Components is Bible, and this course sits on top of it. And I have a few minutes left, so I'm open to questions. Everyone looks dazed. Well, guys, I'm hanging around. If you need that link, you can go on my computer and take a photograph. If you don't get it there, I'll leave it there a few more minutes. And thanks very much. Thank you.